episode of Bonfire Chats, where we're diving into the heart of education and student success through social and emotional learning, or SEL. Today, we're joined by a remarkable expert, Dr. Chris Cipriano, an applied developmental and educational psychologist and assistant professor at the Yale Child Study Center and the director of the Education Collaboratory at Yale. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Cipriano served for 5 years as the Director of Research at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Her work is all about understanding how SEL can truly make a difference for all students. Dr. Cipriano's research delves into the intricate interactions within homes, schools, and communities to build pathways to equitable and optimal outcomes. With her extensive experience, $9 million in grant funding, and over 80 published papers, she is at the forefront of SEL. Join us as we demystify what SEL is and isn't, and why it's the foundation for student success. Dr. Cipriano's insights are a beacon of knowledge in this critical arena. Thanks for being here, Chris, and all of the amazing work you do for kiddos. This is really going to be a good conversation, so let's get started. Can you first talk about just the simple idea of grasping the definition of social emotional learning?
Absolutely. And Donna, thank you so much for having me here today to speak with you all. So SEL is not one thing. It is a interrelated set of cognitive, affective, behavioral skills and strategies. They underscore how we learn, how we develop, how we maintain healthy relationships, how we are healthy, both physically and psychologically. It underscores your humanity and how you're engaging. So it's a whole set of skills and strategies. It's not any one thing, and it's certainly not any one program. And I think that's the first kind of place we want to really anchor in. We're talking about a range of different skills and strategies for how we engage and how we develop emotionally and socially.
So, okay, so talk a little bit about your take on all of this and what you drew, why you were drawn into this field. Talk a little bit about how this really is the cornerstone of adolescent success.
Absolutely. So a couple of things there. So first, how I got into this work. Well, the field of SEL actually found me. So go back to late 90s. I was in high school. The horrible Columbine shooting tragedy happened. And the reactions, that was like kind of the first mass shooting in the US. The reactions that were happening across states and governments were to ban kids in wearing trench coats and put up metal detectors. And there were kind of these banned types of music that kids were listening to. And I found it really problematic as a teenager that we were kind of presuming something super superficial was like the reason why someone would do or engage in such a unsafe behavior and violent action. And that process, I actually wrote an essay. I ended up meeting President Clinton, being part of this youth house resolution on anti-violence in the country, and kind of just started being part of that initial movement of thinking about how do we create safe spaces in schools. Fast forward to college, my first day of undergraduate, I went to Hofstra University for my undergrad. My first day was the day of the September 11th tragedy. And that experience coming back to campus, we shut down for 2 weeks, coming back 2 weeks later to campus and kind of restarting my undergraduate career, I was disgusted by the racial and ethnic profiling that was occurring in the broader communities that I was a part of. And so I volunteered to become a campus advocate for Facing History in Ourselves, which is one of the oldest longstanding SEL programs before it was called SEL, programs that existed about kind of understanding diversity and difference. And anyway, I could keep giving you stories like that, but it basically found me until I was in my graduate degree program, or actually my postgraduate degree program, when I realized that there was a term for the work that I do, which is social and emotional learning.
Wow, what a background. And I can see now why you're in what you're in and all of the work that you're doing. So can you talk about, are there certain skills, SEL skills, that are absolute must-haves for teenagers, and why are they so important?
Yeah. So, when you think about kind of what the research says about adolescent development and how, like, what's happening for the adolescents as they're kind of moving through their growth, cognitively, socioemotionally, physically, and physiologically, with the onset of kind of hormones and puberty, we know, right, that there are big emotional swings, there's shifts in kind of the ways in which we are understanding and processing our world, and we're becoming adults faster in our bodies than we are in our brains as we go across the continuum. All of those things, no one is disputing them in developmental science. That is kind of how development progresses, right? But we're also talking about social and emotional learning within those constructs, right? If we can understand and be self-aware of how our emotions are, how we're responding to and feeling in the affective experiences of everyday life as a teenager, the embarrassment, the pride, the shyness, the rejection, the anxiety, the stress, that is currency and social capital for how you can engage and how you can be a productive part and member of your school community, how you can, form healthy relationships, or dare we say, maintain healthy ones with your parents, which we all know during adolescence can be particularly, challenging. And so the skills and strategies of SEL, prior to our team's recent meta-analytic work, it was understood to be about 700 skills and strategies. We documented over 4,000 in our latest review that came out in Child Development. So lots of different terms for the same types of things. The most common way to organize the framework, the most common framework of SEL and organizing the skills and strategies is the Castle 5. And so thinking about self-awareness and self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Most SEL skills will funnel into those those 5 skill sets, that skill buckets. And when we think about the importance of that during adolescent, it couldn't be more paramount. Understanding how one's engaging with the world, understanding difference and recognizing it as you're kind of moving through that high school experience, and helping to inform healthy relationship formation and responsible decision-making at a time when we all know we are most susceptible or vulnerable to not.
Wow. So as a mom right now to 2 teen boys, 14, 15 years old, it really can feel like a puzzle at times. And how can SEL help bridge that communication gap and foster more understanding?
Yeah. So, when we think about that difference between, or kind of where we're coming as adolescents and adults to an interaction and to a problem or to a question, the skills of SEL can help to support with, perspective taking and listening to understand, engaging in open inquiry. So we're coming to this from a different perspective on whether or not one should be allowed to, fill in the blank with any given question that an adolescent might say. Having parents gain the skills and strategies to understand and recognize that the affective experience, the emotional and social experience that youth is bringing to that conversation and that ask has a gravity to it, right? It has impact for them emotionally and socially. So how can we engage together in recognizing that what you believe is kind of right or fair or just is different than what I believe is right or fair or just, and come together around that difference. Now, I'm not saying that, emotionally intelligent parents let their kids do everything they ask for, nor am I saying that emotionally intelligent youth get everything they ask for, right? But having the skills to be able to engage in respectful dialogue that is supportive and listening to one another's perspectives on why they view a given kind of situation or circumstance to be as it is, that's, helps us to find our common humanity. And when we think about kind of the long-reaching goal of SEL, wouldn't it be wonderful if all of our kids grew into adults and into a society where we embrace that common humanity with each other?
Right. That's kind of the goal. I want to kind of go a little bit deeper into this with our kids and having those conversations. You talked about how you're not going to always agree. And then as the parent, you kind of do have to make some determinations. How does that then, how can you still have that social emotional learning going on when a child, teen especially, might be resistant to what you're saying as parent, even though the active listening has gone on? And honestly, most parents today don't know how to incorporate this SEL. So can you talk a little bit more about what would the next step be if there was not that understanding together? What would be the next step?
So yeah, so a couple of things. So one, we want to acknowledge that all emotions are valid. And so we may have, and we likely do have, different effective responses to any given situation or problem that's occurring. But that doesn't mean that like the way you feel about it is more right than the way your child feels about it, or adolescent feels about it. So starting with, and this is really the kind of at the forefront of emotional intelligence, starting with the validation of your adolescent's emotion as valid, that you recognize the depth of the experience that they are having and the feeling that they're having, and that you honor that they are feeling, fill in the blank, embarrassed, anxious, frustrated, etc. Right? Starting there, and then opening up dialogue around why you're feeling differently, and asking questions about why are they feeling that way? What is it that's kind of the source behind that affect and the way in which they're expressing it right now? Is it social consequence? Is it, again, like open up that dialogue so that you can have more information to begin to construct a plan together, right? It's when when we shut down communication by invalidating our adolescent or our child or our peer, our adults, this is across the lifespan, right? You invalidate someone else's experience of emotion and then dismiss it as, unimportant, or delegitimize it as like, that doesn't have a place here, right? That can have, rippling ramifications in, one, like confusing how we learn to manage it, or like we don't learn to manage it, or maybe we choose unhealthy ways to manage that experience, right? And we, particularly when we think about adolescents, we want to be thinking about, the types of risk-taking behaviors that they may take, right, to kind of manage or mismanage the experience that they're having of being delegitimized or invalidated by their parents or family. And then work towards solution. Again, I'm not saying that any of this is easy at all. It's all a process and takes time, but, checking yourself in the communication that you're not kind of falling into maybe either like gendered or socialized norms of how your child should, or your adolescent should feel at any given time. And that may be very different than how, you or I or others were raised, right? And kind of like where we were at that time.
I mean, this is so good. That's really, really important information and just awareness for parents and myself as a parent. So can we move into how SEL can really lend a hand in our teens' academic journey?
Sure. So, I mean, when we're learning and cognition, right, we think about the ways in which we learn and how we learn. This is a social emotional process, right? And so the idea that like your emotions kind of are over here, and like we're learning calculus today, or we're going into some, right? Like that is a really, I mean, maybe there have been, hypothetically, there have been some curriculum developers who have treated it as such over the past couple of decades and like fed into this idea that emotions have no place in academic content. But when we think about the experience of learning, right, and how we feel when we're being asked a question, or the content is, challenging to us, or we're having an experience of frustration with what we're learning, or we're reading about something in history that's making us angry, right? These are effective responses and experiences that link to how we remember it, like where we encode and store that information, right? It's inextricably tied, as well as how we choose to use that information. And so kind of all that to be said, when we think about kind of the associations to academic achievement, our recent meta-analysis looked at the evidence available for K-12 universal school-based, so tier 1 SEL programming worldwide. And we found robust and rigorous evidence of the effectiveness of SEL programming on students' academic as well as school functioning. So things like their engagement in school and their attendance, homework completion, right? skills, and, outcomes that we want for all of our kids, right? And for all folks to be able to then engage and be kind of productive, citizens and kind of helpful in like their next phase as they choose where they're headed on their respective academic journey. I will say that I am continuously struck by this idea that like emotions are for little kids, or SEL is for little kids. And when you look at kind of the way the state standards are in the US, when you look at kind of the way in which SEL has proliferated, it's more likely to sit in the earlier grades or even in early childhood. And it kind of becomes less and less paramount as we move into adolescence, even though our experiences of emotion and socialization are more extreme as you're moving through the developmental continuum into, early adolescence and then adulthood, right? So one would argue you kind of like need it more then, right? If you got the base now, but yet it is, it's a continuous negotiation with secondary schools about like where and how to fit this in, because of kind of a preconceived notion that emotions aren't a part of learning. So we work to demystify that and debunk that through our research.
Yeah, that is so interesting to me. Just given, just as a parent, in the teen years now, to me, the emotions are so much more difficult to help our kids manage, and ourselves as parents, because of what's going on with teens. So that is so interesting to me. Do you see things changing in the near future, or is this something that we really have to kind of rebuild into our communities?
I mean, I hope that we will continue to see shifts in the direction of embracing the social emotional health and development of adolescents concurrent with their academic development. I certainly hope so. But I would be foolish to say that like outside of the context of where we're at currently, like nationally and then internationally, right? And so there's a lot of confounding factors right now in both, a recognition of increasing rates of adolescent mental health, challenges and experience of suicidal ideation, bullying, victimization, violence. We can go on and on. Concurrent to kind of increasing resistance to, or people trying to kind of hark back to more traditional or older models of education that act at the exclusion of social emotional skills and strategies. It's potentially quite dangerous, right? If we think about it in terms of what that could do or what that could look like. And the potential is so ripe for SEL to help to support adolescents and kind of navigating the myriad of challenges that they're experiencing in their social emotional health and in their academic experiences at school. But we do need to create the conditions for them to be safe to learn to do that. And unfortunately, at least in the US right now, there are some pockets and places where it is not safe for students to be and learn.
Can we talk a little bit about where do you think that the awareness of parents has kind of come to fruition post-pandemic, of the importance of just at the lowest level of allowing kids their emotions and trying to teach and manage their own emotions? Do you think there's been a shift since the pandemic in family systems?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're kind of asking about like, is there more of a recognition now of the importance of emotion and social emotional learning within learning? And I think it's kind of a like, yes, and so when we look at kind of the patterns of kind of family engagement and involvement, school district adoption, like prioritizing of SEL and school reopening plans and restoration plans, and kind of the ways in which communities were getting engaged with the, onslaught of different kind of traumas that were going on across the US and worldwide in the 2021 and 22 years, we definitely saw that shift. And we are currently now in 2023, and we're seeing some pushback and decline in that areas for a whole host of different kind of political reasons and gain. So it's a yes and.
Okay, that's really interesting. Can you talk about what daily interactions can look like with our teens as parents with SEL? What a daily kind of practice of it might look like?
Sure. So one of the most kind of common home to school connections within social emotional learning, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence here to help us that it helps to support the social emotional and behavioral and academic development of kids, is gratitude, is expressions of gratitude. And so, I'm not necessarily saying anything new here, but asking your adolescent, I ask my kids this all, like, my kids are not adolescents yet, but to have like, what were they grateful for? Identify 3 things they were grateful for. And then in addition to that, asking, really specific questions that help to kind of engage in social emotional skills. So for example, with my kiddos, again, not adolescents yet, I'll ask things about like, tell me about an experience at school today when you were kind to someone. Like, what did it look like? What did it feel like? And again, my kiddos are little, but you can think about how at the secondary school level, how you might engage about like, did you, tell me about an experience at school today where you felt like you were there to support a friend. Like, did you have what you need to support them? Or like, is there any way that, I or your school could have helped to kind of, either help that situation not have occurred, or, if there was like instances of bullying or victimization, or did you know what to say? Was there a time when you didn't know what to say, and open up a dialogue towards that end?
I really like that. Since I have had my 2 young boys, just going to share this. We have done what we called the Van Alden prayer. It takes us 6 minutes to get down Van Alden to get to school. And our quote unquote prayer is a prayer of gratitude for people who don't pray. It's, the gratitude, but that's something that I kind of incorporated when we were having kind of chaos in the mornings, getting ready and trying to just do that reset. And I could say from my family, it has helped. It's, not the perfect solution. It's something that has helped.
Yeah. I really love that. And I'll just pick up on that and share that, other things you could do kind of before the school day or in the morning about like, asking your student, like, how do they want to feel at school today? How, what do they want to see happen? Like, what would they need to do to feel that way? So they want to feel proud and included. Like, what does that look like in what they do? Right. And so kind of really helping to support them to scaffold the behaviors. Right. And like, again, that's going to look different across every kid, every school, every family, but having them recognize that. And, when they're younger, you may use terms like, well, what strategy you're going to do to help that. If you've been working on that with your child, or if they're working on that at school, of what different types of, taking a minute, or the stoplight method of decision making, or whatever it might be. And there's like so many of them that they could be using. Some kids take a breath, others breathing is not helpful, right? But like asking them to really like name it, like how do you want to be feeling like? And there's a line of science that comes out of my colleagues here at Yale, Dr. Mark Brackett and colleagues, and really thinking about this idea of the ideal self and the ways you want to engage, and how can be emotionally intelligent about kind of seeking and striving towards it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Can you tell us what the stoplight method is?
Oh, so the stoplight method of decision-making actually stems from the work of the late Roger Weisberg, who's considered one of the fathers of social emotional learning and founders of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And it's really helping us to stop at red, think, reflect in yellow, and then act. And you can scaffold it between that of like, okay, what are all the respective types of ways in which I could, make a decision now, in like, what would be the ramifications of that be? As kids age, you would like extend that to, all the different ways. I know with like the littles, we can talk about things in terms of like, you get kicked at recess, playing soccer, and stop. Okay. Like, you got kicked, it hurt. Like, what could have happened there? Like, was it intentional? Was the child trying to kick you, or were they just trying to get the ball? Right? What are the different decisions you can make right now before you engage back, so that to inhibit the likelihood of kicking back?
Okay. And you just tell us exactly scaffolding? Can you talk about what you're saying when you're using that word?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, I know. It's like, it's a wild thing. So I'm a first-gen high school graduate, and I realized that I've like been in professional life for so long now that I've like, I use jargony words, and it's, so we're really just helping to like step our children and ourselves like through a decision or through how we're thinking about it, so that we can have all the information there and understand it and organize it in a way that's meaningful to us. And so just saying to a child, like, or an adolescent or an adult, to like make a decision, right? That could be a really big, like amorphous type of ask, but helping to kind of lay out, okay, so we need to like, what are the different kind of elements of the decision you're trying to make, or the elements of the problem you're trying to solve? What are the different scenarios for how you could solve it? What are the different strategies you could use? And then we really can engage in the social awareness component of it as well, of like, what is the impact of that decision or that choice on others? Who are the other people involved? Because we don't grow up in a silo, right? So it's all community.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about your work with marginalized communities, and where have you seen teenagers triumph with SEL?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we kind of contextualize what we mean by like marginalized. And so in our work at my lab and with our research partners, we're really engaged in intentional research-based community partnerships that help to support and understand how students, families, communities that are marginalized within education systems on the basis of race, class, gender, sexuality, disability, language, how these identities are kind of pushed out or not centered in the ways in which, a school is operating, decisions are being made, and so forth. And we know that for communities and for students who are marginalized, or families that are marginalized, like racially marginalized within a school system, they likely create different scenarios and different kind of systems of support outside of the current system, because the current system in many cases has wronged them or excluded them actively or unintentionally, like is the case with students with disabilities and kind of the legacy there in the United States.
So as teens are navigating this digital world, it's so tough, and it's very hard for parents as well. How can we apply SEL to like social media use, technology?
Well, if you have another hour, because I think there's a lot we could talk about there. So
right.
Some kind of a few kind of key things to keep in mind, right? First is we're going to go right back to that self-awareness and that recognition of how we're feeling, right? And then we're hearing a lot about this recently, but there's been, over a decade of literature of what are the effective experiences that people are having when they're engaging on social media. So thinking about and talking to your teenager, to yourself, like how, when you're, people use the phrase doom scrolling, or when you're right, or when you're, they might not call it perseverating, when you're stuck on revisiting a post over and over and over again, right? When you're going into it, or you're engaging, or you're getting the validation of the likes or the shares or the right friends, fill in the blank, right? What are you feeling during those interactions, that effective response, acknowledging that, talking about that, opening up that line of communication? What is that telling you? What is that information? How is that information kind of helpful or healthy for you? Or how is that, signaling that this is something that we need to we don't want to be feeling that way, that those feelings of sadness or loneliness, or, again, fill in the blank, that's information. Okay, so we can help to kind of control what we're doing or how we're doing it or the time we're doing it, how we're engaging with the technology or abstaining from it, and helping to kind of support in that use. I think an important other feature that, again, has a long line of literature in the social psychology arena, long being, over a decade now, we've had social media around, is thinking about how when adolescents in particular post online, we know this for adults as well in the literature, right? That it's in essence an idealized self, or like not a true, right? It's so when there is rejection of that idealized self, like we can imagine the scenario where that kind of if you think about the continuum of how you can have an effective response, that it would hurt if I had the fleeting moment of the rejection in person, but that's like my not my ideal self. It's not my completely lighting, makeup, all the things, right? But if somebody rejects what I consider to be my most perfect or ideal self, that is a deeper, kind of a bigger effective emotional response, right? So we think about that during adolescence. And then in addition, because it exists online, it often can be like re-traumatizing over and over again, because it's there, it's static. It's not like someone saying something, rude to someone walking in the hallway at school or at the mall, and it's like fleeting and maybe not everybody heard it or only a few people did, and it's gone. When it's online, it's there and it stays there, and you can keep revisiting it. And the idea in adolescence of the imaginary audience, which comes out of adolescent egocentrism, what we know about adolescent social and emotional development at this time, is that adolescents are more prone to already think that everyone's kind of looking at them, right? They're already kind of already there. And then you've got kind of this social media setup where it's showing them how many views or who's looking at them and how, and it's kind of can be, re-traumatizing or re-triggering. So anyway, just a few kind of initial thoughts on that, but there's definitely a lot more for us to unpack. And I know researchers are working very hard to help to support and explore how best to support parents and families in this regard.
Yeah, I think sometimes I feel like, this generation of parents we're like guinea pigs, and we're just trying to kind of figure out what the best way is to do this without all of the expertise that you have. So it can be.
We're all in it together. I mean, another, I mentioned of that how you're feeling during the experience of the media, but I mean, another thing to do with your kid can be how they're experiencing when the media is taken away or at the end of the use of the media and the engagement. I'm doing this in my own house right now with my soon-to-be 10-year-old, of trying to help him recognize that when his Minecraft timing is up and he no longer can play Minecraft, that his effective response is rather extreme to that. He gets very upset. And so I'm trying to help him acknowledge that, like, is he really that upset? Like, what is it? Why are you upset? Is it the friends? Is it the game? Or is it our brain, what's happening here? Again, we're working on it. We're a work in progress too, on how to help to support and recognize that piece of it, so that he can hopefully in time make his own healthy decisions to have limits.
Yeah. And that's so interesting that you bring that up, because, in our house, we have the rule. It's the phone is in an hour before bedtime to get that, trigger for it's time to sleep, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it has been in place routinely, for years, it's still interesting to me that, can I have 5 more minutes? Can I have 5 more minutes? And
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to manage sometimes, because you think, okay, this has been in place. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
part don't you understand? But
Yeah.
it is kind of like the dopamine, I guess. It's just trying to, yeah.
And also, I mean, you can also try to build in teaching skills of time management, right? And again, I'm speaking from what we're doing right now as well, of this, of like recognizing how long you had, how long it took. I mean, we do this in our professional lives as well with any given task, right? You can use this with your children as well. And like, well, you had, 15 minutes, or you had the hour, or whatever it might be that you're being given. What did you do with that time? How did you use it? Right? What was the value of that to you? How did it feel? How fast did it go? How long is the time? Right? So start to kind of feel and understand that. Those are productive time management skills that extend into the workplace, right? When we have multiple tasks on our to-do lists and we have to organize ourselves into adulthood. So kind of helping to kind of build that recognition. We can use social media as like one way to support our kids in doing that, just like you would with like how long it took you to do your math homework versus your science homework versus that group project.
I really like that. I mean, we only have a few minutes. I could talk to you forever. I could ask you question after question after question.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for having me.
Can you kind of sum up for us what you might say, to parents out there who, are trying to incorporate SEL into their families, how to get started, and to know that this is really a process, and that this generation of parents is really learning how to put this into the family system.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just going to go back to something I said before, that, emotions are valid. They're inherently valid, and they are also information. They're information that help us to understand ourselves and the decisions we make in managing ourselves, in our acknowledgement of and recognition of our social world and what's happening around us, and how we engage, how we form relationships, how we make, healthy, productive, positive decisions. And so, anchoring in the importance of that is key. That's the kind of foundation of emotional intelligence. It's a foundation when we think of the trajectory of emotion to socialization across the SEL continuum. Like, we need to start with that awareness and recognition that emotions, are information, and they are important, and they have a place and serve a role there. And to reiterate something else I mentioned earlier, we want to be really careful that we don't fall into scripts and patterns of how we may have been raised or socialized in other settings to invalidate or delegitimize someone's experience of emotion, that something is like not a big deal, right? Like saying like, or, not, or like, gendered expressions of like, well, boys don't cry, and all. There's, been all of this work and research to overturn these patterns and these progressions, but we as parents and as teachers, like, we have to live that. We have to own that and not fall into those scripts that would inhibit healthy emotional and social development for our kids.
Thank you so much. You are a gift. Your knowledge.
Donna, you're very kind. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to get to speak with you.
So great to speak with you too. Thank you again, Dr. Chris Cipriano.
Thank you.